so folks can get a good understanding of Ed Finance, as well as our relationship with the Joint Fiscal Office. We also have State Treasurer Beth Pierce coming in at some point today to talk to us by way, introduce herself, as well as talk a little bit about things that she might be thinking about. I'm also interested in her thoughts on bonding and capital needs and how to meet some of those capital needs. And then after the break, June Tierney, Commissioner of the Department of Public Service, cannot meet with us until 3:30. So our break might be a little bit longer than usual, and I apologize for that scheduling, but I would like to hear from Commissioner Tierney and Clay Purvis today. We've asked them to talk a little bit about, to give us an update on broadband, particularly as it relates to schools, low-income areas, and making certain that children and families have the access they need. So with that, I will happy to turn it over to two familiar faces to me from having served in finance for 4 years. Catherine, great to see you. Chloe, great to see you. And a quick question to our terrific committee assistant, Jeannie, do you know if Beth Pierce is coming in at a certain time, or are we going to monitor things and let her know?
I thought she was starting off, and I'm emailing back and forth with her assistant now, so.
Great. I thought she might be starting off as well, since that's how she's listed, but since she's not here, I think we should just get started. And then hopefully she can jump in once we're finished.
Can you give me an estimate time?
I'm thinking it probably will be close to 2 o'clock.
Okay, I'll see if that works.
Does that work for you, Catherine? And
yeah, I think that's a good time. Don't you think, Chloe? That's
great. Well, welcome to the two of you. There are new members and returning members, and so we appreciate this. And I think even though, I think we can all use this kind of refresher. So thank you.
Sure. And why don't we just introduce ourselves? And I'm Catherine Benham from the Joint Fiscal Office. I'll let Chloe introduce herself in a second. I'm Mark Peralt, who also covers education finances, out on leave until the end of February. So I'm filling in while he is on leave on big picture policy. I worked on education finance when Act 60, prior to Act 60 and during Act 60. So I have some familiarity with it. And anyway, I'll let Chloe take it on from here. Introduce yourself, Chloe. Why don't you?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Chloe Wexler. I'm also with the Joint Fiscal Office. I'm primarily the fiscal data analyst at the office. So I work on a lot of large sort of data intensive requests. That does sometimes land me in education finance, as you can imagine. And I will be sort of covering for Mark with Catherine as well. So we'll give it a go with this introduction to Vermont's education finance system. Can you see the slides all right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And I think with this particular presentation, it is easier if there are questions that come up, reach out, raise your hands, or somehow get my attention, or maybe Jeannie can help with that. And just so everything sort of builds on it, and I want to make sure that everyone's following along. So.
Sure, I'm happy to keep an eye open for hands so that you don't get distracted.
That would be great. That would be great.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so just a broad overview of what we're going to cover here today. The first thing that we're going to do is sort of review the timeline. So, how do we get the information? How do we determine where the rates need to be set? And sort of just go through that discussion. We're going to talk about the education fund outlook and the revenues that are available to support education. We're going to talk about the key terminology. All of there are some unique words that we use when we're describing this system, so we'll touch on those. How the homestead property taxes are calculated, and a brief introduction to the property tax credit. So we're going to start with our timeline here. We're right at the beginning of this timeline. On or before December 1st, the tax commissioner will, in conjunction with the Joint Fiscal Office and the Agency of Education and even the Department of Finance and Management, will project sort of the status of the education fund and the education property tax rates that would be required to fund school budgets for the estimated school budgets for the coming fiscal year. So that's right where we are right now in the timeline. There is going to be, actually at the end of this week, we'll be sort of taking a look at those projections in correspondence with the new revenue forecast. So again, just sort of highlighting the fact that this December 1 letter is a big estimate, and it is subject to change as we continually get better and better information in. So the first sort of change will be the new non-property tax revenues, and then also we will be updating our estimates of school budgets when we get more information on those. So I just sort of wanted to highlight that. Because actually, right now schools are sort of working on or have finalized their budgets, and they'll be submitting those to voters for approval in March at town meeting, or in this case this year, probably by Australian ballot. Once we have a sense of what those budgets are and what voters have approved in their local towns, the legislature will sort of reevaluate the education fund and sort of set those yields and the base tax rates at the rate necessary to fund the voter approved budgets. The tax department will then actually finalize the rates and send them to towns on or before June 30th. The towns will then actually send out the property tax bills. And then finally, once the towns have collected the money from the property taxpayers and sort of remitted the money to the education fund, the schools will receive payments from the education fund to approve the budgeted operations for that year.
Okay, I'm going to jump in, Chloe.
Okay, please.
So I'd like you to go back and just tell everyone a little bit about what the yield is. Tell also where is that decision made in terms of committee process. And I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Because,
sure.
So please, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think understanding what the yield is, the base education tax rates, where those decisions are made, and just a little bit more background there would be helpful.
Sure. So we are going to touch on that
Okay.
a little bit later in the presentation.
Great.
We can move the order around a little bit and jump to that now if you'd like.
No, Chloe, whatever works best for you. I just want people to really understand. Sometimes, at least when I got to finance, there was a lot of just a lot of vocabulary, if you will. I always thought it'd be great to have a vocabulary list, sort of. So I just want to make sure everybody's understanding things. That's all.
Absolutely. I think it looks like there's one other question. Senator Chittenden?
Chair Campion?
Yes, please. Sorry.
I have been trying to understand the funding formula, the yield, and the base education rate for 6 years, and I keep coming up short. So I'm paying a lot of attention and taking notes, but as much as you can boil this down so that I can also explain it to my constituents, I would welcome that. But that's where I'm coming from, and thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this meeting.
Great. Well, with that, we'll be really diligent about going through these slides.
Great. I'll just add to that. I think when I talked to Senator Mazza about getting on this committee and chairing it, the only thing he required was that I come back to him and finally be able to explain to him and help him understand this process. So
okay.
It is. I do think it's a new person thing. Yes, it's for all of us. I mean, it really is one of those things, and I'd love to be able to have all the committee members at some point have an elevator speech, around this, because it comes up all the time. So I'll leave it there. Senator Hooker, please.
And if I could just add, if we could hear it in English.
Okay, no pressure. No pressure whatsoever.
None, Chloe, none.
Thank you.
No. I'm happy. It's like this is a small committee. I'm happy. Please ask questions. We
Right.
can go over things. If we don't get through it, we can come back. The more people understand it, as far as I'm concerned, the better.
And I just want to quantify what I just said. If somebody needs it in Spanish, we'll have it in Spanish and what other languages as well.
You bet.
All right. Well, I can't speak Spanish, but that's okay. Maybe in French. Okay. So, with that in mind, I think from at least we're going to start at sort of the education fund outlook, which is obviously something that you may have seen floating around on the floor or discussed. And this really is the tool that the legislature uses to determine how much money has to be raised in order to fund schools in any given year. So that's sort of just like our first sort of building block. And what the education fund outlook shows is all of the revenue that is coming into the education fund, and then how that revenue is used. And so I think that is going to be a good place to start. And just to remind you, this is just jog your memory. This is what we're looking at. This is just a snapshot of the education fund outlook. So you can see it's going to end up detailing, the average homestead property tax rates and the yield, which we'll get into in more detail in the coming slides. It also shows you the sources. So how much money is being raised from the homestead education property tax and non-homestead property taxes, and then all of these non-property tax sources that come into the fund, which we'll discuss more in the next slides. So sort of a broad overview so that we can just get an idea of what really are the primary sources that are funding education. And there's 2/3 of the education fund is raised directly on the education property tax. Of that, 41% is raised on non-homestead property and 26% is raised on homestead property. The remaining third is from non-property tax sources, and we'll talk about those in the next slide. So the non-property tax sources that go into the education fund currently are 100% of the sales and use tax, 25% of the meals and rooms tax, 1/3 of the purchase and use tax, the lottery transfer, and the Medicaid transfer. And so we used to have, if you will recall, we had a general fund transfer that was coming to the education fund each year. And in FY 2019, that transfer was replaced with these dedicated revenue sources so that the education fund would, there just wouldn't be that link between the education fund and the general fund. They would be sort of two separate entities.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to interrupt you there. Senator Chittenden has a question.
On the previous slide, do you have a general breakdown of the non-homesteads? What percentage are commercial properties versus second homes not qualifying as a homestead, or is that not something that you have available to you?
I don't have that available at my fingertips, but every year the Department of Property Valuation and Review produces an annual report, and that's really where some of that information could be derived. And it, depending on how deep you guys want to go, it may be interesting to have them come in and talk through that report at some time.
Thank you.
And no problem. Okay, so now we're sort of saying, okay, we've brought all of this money in, and how do we spend it? And within the education fund, nearly every dollar that goes into the education fund goes directly to direct payments to school districts, either in the form of the education payment or state categorical aid. So this is money that's flowing directly to schools. And then there is, a small portion of the fund that covers teacher pensions and an accounting and financial systems.
Chloe?
Yes?
Is that
Yes, please, Senator Persley.
on the prior slide, you had net of the homestead. Why? And you didn't have net for the others. Why is that netted, the homestead property tax?
That's a great question, and we are going to touch on that later in the presentation. But the quick answer is the net. If you recall, on the homestead side, we have the property tax credit system or the income sensitivity system, and so the gross tax would be all of the money we raise on homestead property, but then we apply that income adjustment, and that brings us down to the net amount. But there we'll get to talk about that in more detail a bit later in the presentation. So this is where we're going to get into sort of talking about the terminologies and the yields and how those homestead tax rates are calculated. So the first thing that I want to flag that we just touched on with Senator Perchlik's question is that in Vermont, there are 3 tax bases that are subject to the statewide education tax. There's non-homestead property, which is, as Senator Chittenden mentioned, industrial property, rental housing, commercial, second homes. And that non-homestead property tax rate is uniform across towns, across the entire state. There's one non-homestead tax rate for the whole state. On the flip side, we have homestead property, which is a residence home and all contiguous land. The homestead property tax rate in each town does vary directly in proportion to the per pupil education spending that has been voted locally in that town. So if you vote to spend a greater amount per pupil, you will have a higher tax rate. If you vote to spend less, then your tax rate will be lower for homestead properties. In Vermont, you are uniquely able to either pay your property tax liability based on your homestead property value or your household income. So the third property tax base is that household income amount, which is broadly defined as all income, taxable and non-taxable, of everybody who resided in your household at any time during that tax year. So a child that could be working part-time, or even completely unrelated individuals that are sharing that home. And the income tax rate, similar to the homestead tax rate, does vary in each town.
So can I ask a question about,
Please.
I got my picture off, but.
That's okay.
So on the household income, the last category you're talking about, where the tax affects everyone in the house. Now, we did something last year related to rental folks, and so to offset some of the concerns that were there about people renting with income. Are you going to talk about that, or can you just briefly address
Sure.
that?
So what we did, the renter rebate program is separate from the property tax sort of system, and that was actually a large amount of what that renter rebate proposal did, was to really take the renter rebate and dissociate it from the property tax system. And so now the renter rebate program is acting more like a subsidy program. A renter subsidy, because it's very tricky to directly tie rent to property taxes. And so that was sort of like the reasoning behind that sort of dissociation. And in that reform, which is actually going to go into effect not this year, but next year, and the tax department did a ton of work on this. There is, and it exists now in this system as well, but it's a little bit different if you are owning a home together or living in a home, as opposed to, it's very common that 2 unrelated individuals would be sharing an apartment. And in the old system, when you were calculating a household income for that entire sort of rental unit, you would have to share your personal rental information with your roommate. which may or may not be very comfortable. And so the new program allows for each individual to apply separately and just receive half of the credit they otherwise would. Does that
Thank you.
answer your
No,
question?
that's good. That I remember. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. That's great. Very, very, very unsimple, but very helpful.
Yes.
Okay.
Did I see one other hand? Yes, Senator Hooker?
Thank you, Chloe. I need more of an explanation on the household income and how is that related then to the property tax?
Sure. So I think maybe what we'll do is while we're just on this, okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to,
Chloe, this
Explain
might be
this.
this might
Yeah.
be helpful. I think because we also have Treasurer Pierce coming in. Why, if possible, if you could think about this as 2 separate visits to finance. No, which is, I think this is this is an opportunity to introduce some things and get some questions out there, and then think about coming back. I think we'll work with Jeannie Lowell to find a time. I think maybe Wednesday afternoon, and then from some of the questions you're getting today, and just generally, I would like you to think about coming up with the 10 questions every legislator should be able to answer about this. People are always asked these questions, a range of questions. If you were to say, this shows me that people really understand what's happening here with statewide, with education tax, that people would be able to answer these questions. And I'd like people to just have an opportunity to reflect on those before you come in again. I think that might be a tool that we could use to, again, I'm speaking for myself, but I suspect others I know in the body and in the legislature, this is complicated stuff. And we want to make it as accessible and give us all a level of fluency when we talk about it with our constituents. So think about it just as 2 visits. So take your time and we'll get through as much as we can today.
Sure, absolutely. Should we keep working through these slides now?
Keep going. Yep.
Okay. So, Senator Hooker, we will get to a larger explanation on household income in these next slides and how it does relate to the homestead tax. So here we go. We're going to try and step through how the homestead tax rates are adjusted and subsequently the income tax rates are adjusted to account for per pupil spending. And so the way that we do this is we'll just jump ahead we do this through the magic word that everyone wants to know about, sort of the yield. And so the yield can really be thought of as the amount per pupil of spending that can be supported by the education fund in any given year for a homestead tax rate of $1 or a household income percent of 2%. So in Vermont, that's sort of that is really the crux of the difference in our system, is that if you are a homeowner, you are eligible to pay your education property tax liability either on the value of your homestead property or based on your household income, whichever one is less. And so that's really, and they both will move with how much you're spending, but there is sort of that income component built in to really sort of capture what the legislature has determined is sort of homeowners' ability to pay. So you may, there's a difference. There may be a difference in your property tax liability and your income in that year. And so the property tax credit adjusts for that. And the way it does that is through the use of the yield. Okay, so stepping back, how do we even determine? So in this slide, when we're talking about the yield, we were talking about an amount per pupil, right? So we're saying that you could potentially spend, in FY 2019, you could spend $10,222 $10,220 per pupil. And when we're talking about per pupil, we're talking about an equalized pupil. And this is another thing that you'll hear. And so what even is an equalized pupil when people are talking about that? And the reason that we use equalized pupils is to try and calculate sort of an average student in terms of assumed costs for a district. Because, for example, different categories of students have different costs associated with them. It's more expensive to educate a 10th grader than it is to educate a first grader, for example, because in the case of the 10th grader, you have to buy textbooks and they have labs and there's a science class. And so we apply different factors to different pupils to sort of account for those cost differentials. And that's really, at the end of the day, what an equalized pupil is. Because there's one district that might have 100 10th graders and another district that might have 100 first graders. And so we want to make sure that both of those districts are being treated the same. The cost categories that we differentiate in Vermont currently are grade of study, like I was talking about, economically disadvantaged students, and English language learners. The Agency of Education is the body that performs this calculation. And the calculation is based on 2 years of average daily membership data, which is actually taken during a school survey from the 11th to the 30th day of the school year. The other sort of thing that we always hear, so you hear education spending per equalized pupil, right? And then the next question is, what is education spending? And this is a good question because it's not just your school budget. So when you go to town meeting and they say, okay, our school budget is going to be $25 million, their education spending is actually less than that budgeted amount, because education spending, we want to pull out, education spending is really the amount of additional money, or the amount of money that the school needs from the education fund. And so the school, in that overall budget, that budget includes money that the school is getting from the federal government and also directly from state categorical programs. And so education spending is the budgeted amount less federal and state categorical aid. I think here's a real life example. Okay, so this is actually what you would see when you went and voted on your budget at town meeting. This is the language that you would see on your articles of your articles to vote on at town meeting. And so again, we'll say, shall the voters of the school district adopt a budget? And so here we are, we're talking about the overall budget of $25 million, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the next fiscal year. And then the next line jumps to, if approved, it will result in an education spending per equalized pupil of $16,925 in this example. And so pulling out the information that we can get from this and sort of relating it to the terms that we've already used. We have our budget, which is the total spending that the school needs. And then we have our categorical and federal offsets. So the school is receiving $4 million in money from the federal government, and that could be to support special education and potentially some school meals and other federal offsets. Also money that the school is receiving for categorical grants. And we have a number of categorical grants in the fund. Special education is funded through a categorical grant. We have a transportation grant. And so that money is taken off, and then you get to your education spending amount. In this example, I have decided that education spending is $21 million. The school has determined that their equalized pupils are 1,255 for that calendar year, which gives them the magic number that everyone talks about of education spending per equalized pupil of 16,925. And this is the number here that would then be compared to the yield to determine property tax rates. And we will step back into that calculation if there are no questions on this slide. Yes.
Perchlik?
What about carry forward funds? Would that be also part of the kind of a category grant and federal offsets if they have carrying forward from the last fiscal year?
Yes, it would be. It would if the district is electing to use that carry forward, it would be an offset from their budget, because that is not money that they are requiring from the education fund in that given year. Another example would maybe be if the district knew that it was going to be receiving a certain amount of tuition revenue, for example, that would also be excluded. So stepping back in with our district that is voting to spend $6,925. In this example, if that vote passed and the yield was set at $10,220, we would calculate that district's homestead tax rate to be 1.656. And correspondingly, their income tax rate, which is the percentage of their household income that they are eligible to pay, the maximum amount they are eligible to pay. So sort of, I think a good way of thinking about that is, so let's take, I have my calculator right here. So let's take somebody that has a household income of $75,000. In this scenario, the income tax rate is 2.73. So they are eligible to pay 2.73% of their household income. So in our calculation, that would be 75,000 times. That would be about $2,050. That would be the maximum amount that they were eligible to pay, even if, and that value would be compared to how much they did pay on their house site value. Does that make sense, Senator Hooker? A little bit?
Go ahead, Senator.
I'm sure eventually it will sink in. This is all new to me, so.
Okay. Well, like we said, this is maybe our first shot at the apple. So this is really sort of just an introduction into how those calculations are made. There's a further adjustment that is called the common level of appraisal. And I know that this is another thing that there's a lot of questions on. And I'll just really briefly set the stage on this because, and I want to sort of, before we get into this, I want to say that the complexity in the system, all of the complexity is there really to create equity, and it's this constant struggle between, you can have a very simple system or you can have a very equitable system. And our education finance system is extremely equitable at the expense of being a little bit complicated. I won't even say everything that we do is really to try and make it so that everybody is contributing equitably. And the CLA is one further sort of step in that direction, because we have 259 towns and gores in the state, and each one of those 259 towns and gores has their own grand list and their own schedule of when they last reappraised. So that means that there isn't a consistent measure of property values across the state. In Montpelier, the last appraisal was 10 years ago, and in St. Johnsbury, they did an appraisal last year. So that means that the numbers in Montpelier's grand list they don't directly relate to the numbers on St. Johnsbury's grand list. And so the CLA is really that factor that brings everybody to a common level, to make sure that all the properties in the state are contributing fairly and equally. Because there are, obviously, if my house was appraised 8 years ago, its current value is a lot higher than what it's listed for. And so the CLA is that adjustment. And maybe for this example, I'll leave it at that and try and just let that sink in a little bit.
Chloe,
Yes.
just recently with the pandemic, the residential property values have escalated hugely with out-of-staters coming in. And have you been involved at all in discussions about how, it's going to affect reappraisals for sure, but how that might affect the CLA?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And I think it's an important thing to talk about. So the CLA is calculated annually by the tax department and the property valuation and review. And the CLA is based on 3 years of sales data. So we do try and have, basically 3 years. So to try and sort of soften trends in the market. Obviously, right now we're experiencing a trend in which property values are increasing, and sales are going for very high above appraisal values. I will say that due to the timing of the study, the 3-year period that we're looking at for this year's common level of appraisal is from April 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2020. So it doesn't actually include the boom of pandemic related sales. That will be factored into the CLA for FY23. And so yes, it is something that the legislature may want to consider talking about or thinking about, but for FY22 common levels of appraisals, those really haven't been directly affected by the pandemic, except exactly as you noted, in the event of if a town reappraised in 2021, essentially.
Yeah, so this is a bill that I've asked, that I've been working on with some, my local town assessor and others. And the other side of that is the commercial industrial property values that are either not affected or going down. So there's a bunch of stuff there that's going to affect the whole fund ultimately. But that's a comment. So anyway, I just let the committee know I'm working on that bill. And I think Abby Shepherd reached out to you about it. So
yes, I have heard, and I believe she's also on that note, sort of, I think it, depending on what the committee is thinking with that, again, it would be very helpful to hear sort of on the ground what property valuation and review is seeing that's happening.
Yeah.
Senator Perchlik, did you have a question?
Well, just to flag, and maybe I'll speak with Senator Lyons offline about her bill, but one thing that when I was on the select board that I was surprised was that the sale property, the town, so somebody bought a new house and they bought it for twice the appraisal value, the town can't change the tax rate because of that, even though the sale at an arm's length sale is considered one of the ways of determining the value. So a town can only change it if they do a townwide appraisal, even though it was clearly that the value was seen by the buyer. But on the reverse side, the buyer can come if they do an arm length transaction and pay less than the appraisal level. They can go to the town and demand that their taxes be reduced. So it seems like the town, has one arm tied behind their backs when it comes to the property valuation thing. So I don't know if that's what Lyons is working on.
That's not in the bill, but it's certainly related to it. And we see that all the time on the BCA. It's yes, a whole nother area.
Yeah. And that sounds like a little bit more specific to municipal property taxes and your municipal grand list, because on the state side, that difference between the assessed value and the sale price is what the CLA is doing. But obviously there isn't that ability on the municipal side, because your grand list is your grand list, and it doesn't take into account those sales.
Chloe, I can give you about 7 or 8 more minutes to finish this general introduction, and then
Sure.
I'd like to reschedule with Jeannie for Wednesday afternoon immediately
That
after
sounds
the floor.
that
And
sounds
I
fine.
think that will give us another hour and a half or so to work on this and give people time to digest things, come up with questions, and for you actually, and I mean this, we need to get to a level of fluency. So I think you coming up with some questions that we should all be able to answer would be helpful. It is, Senator Hooker, I think, was in a way joking about language, but there's a complexity to this, and we do want people to be able to speak with a level of fluency to constituents to be able to answer questions. So let's go for another 5 or 6 minutes, and then we'll shift to the treasurer, and then we'll have you come back Wednesday afternoon for an hour and a half.
Sure, that works fine for me.
Senator Campion, can I ask a question?
Yes, absolutely, Senator Terenzini.
Yes, and it's sort of maybe a statement. Maybe it's not appropriate this time, or maybe I should wait for Senator Pierce. So you can guide me here, Chloe. But I'm taking notes, and it was on one of your first slides as you gave sort of a timeline. So a school board puts together a proposed budget, right now about this time, if they haven't already finished, to get printed on the ballots for town meeting day. And then assuming that, say, a school board, they did their due diligence, they did everything they could, and there's a small increase of 1%, say, and they sell that to their voters. The voters approve the budget. And then I've seen time and again, you get down to number 4 there, where it says tax department sets spending adjustment homestead tax rate for each town on or before June 30th. Months after, from my experience, months after that municipal or that community votes to approve or decline their school budget, then you might think, all right, well, our budget's going up 1%. That's what taxes are. The perception is maybe taxes are going up that much. But then you get from the tax department, well, actually, after we did our recalculations, the budget's actually going up 5.8%. It wasn't a 1% increase. So unless I'm absolutely crazy about what I'm saying right now, but to me, it seems a little bit convoluted when, you set the budget, you vote on the budget, you think it's going up this percent, and then months later you find out it actually went up 3, 4, 5% more. Does that sound crazy, or am I just talking out both sides of my mouth here?
No. I think it depends. I think it depends on, again, sort of all of this terminology, right? So I think your budget, the amount that your budget went up is probably is staying relatively constant to what you voted on. But what is changing possibly is that education spending amount. So, how much the district, if the district, for example, sort of had to readjust the estimate of how much federal money or state money they were getting in, that could cause a change. The other big thing that could cause a change is that equalized pupil count, if that were to change. and this, I think, sort of again brings us back to really the heart of the complexity in the system is that it's a shared, and maybe this is going to be a good place for us to sort of end today's discussion, but we all share across the entire state, right? So we don't really know 100% what the yield or what the education tax rates will be until every school has told us what they're going to spend. So it's impossible really for us. We can't guarantee a tax rate on town meeting because we don't know what every school district in the state is going to vote to approve to spend. And we can give you an idea, but even if your school comes in with a 1% increase, every other school in the state could come in with a 5% increase. And then tax rates for everybody would go up, even if your district only went up 1%.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't, believe me, I don't sit here thinking I have the answer to the solutions to these big questions because I'm just scratching the surface and understanding this. But I think when you look at the rapidly increasing costs of in your budgets of health insurance and your obligations to your faculty in terms of their contracts, and the special education costs are skyrocketing year after year. It just, to me, it's difficult to be transparent with voters when you ask them, here's the budget, this is what we intend going up, and then 3 or 4 months later you find out, well, it's actually going to be more in many cases. So good conversation anyway, I think, somewhere to start.
Absolutely. And I will try and think of some of the top questions that you guys are going to get to talk about next week.
Thank you, Chloe. And I know we also are going to be sending you some questions.
Oh, great.
And, again, the more time I think we spend on this, the better, at least for the time being, particularly before we jump into the weighting study and other things that are going to be related to this. So appreciate you coming in today for the introduction.
Yes, absolutely. We'll spend some more time.
Great. And I hope, great. Catherine, any final words from you?
No, you're asking good questions, and I think you're right. Don't ever feel bad if it takes a while to understand it, because it took me quite a while to get there also. So
Yeah. Same here. Great. Okay. Thank you both. And we'll
No
look forward to
problem.
seeing you both on Wednesday afternoon.
So say, Catherine, that's scary.
I have faith. You can.
Great. We are now, those are great questions. And I know Senator Chittenden has some good questions. He's going to send them to Chloe and open copy all of us. If other people have questions, please, if you're comfortable, open copy the committee. So between now and Wednesday, we can also have a back and forth and understand some things. And then, as I said, we're going to spend some more time Wednesday afternoon jumping into this. And as you heard, I asked Chloe to really come up with some questions that we can answer and maybe some exercises that we can go through, because I know I, for one, will only benefit from it. With that, I am delighted to pivot to our state treasurer, Beth Pierce. Nice to see you, Madam Treasurer.
Nice to see you as well.
It's great that you can join us and talk to us on this day that we are jumping into education funding. And we would be grateful to have a general introduction from you in terms of the Treasurer's Office, some of the work that you do, how you might interact with this committee. And then talk to us a little bit about funding and particularly about bonding. I know this is something that at least it came up a bit. I'll just throw it all out there right now, Madam Treasurer, that bonding is not something that you're always a big fan of. And so you can either squash that rumor or support that rumor.
Okay.
Because as you know, capital is essential as we move forward with a number of different projects in this state, one of which we're going to be hearing from June Tierney later, which is broadband expansion. So we're thrilled to have you here. We look forward to working with you. It's a great committee, and we'll turn it to you.
Well, thank you very much, and it is a pleasure to see you folks. And Senator, we very much appreciate your work, and we've worked together a long time. I remember when you were over in House Education, I dropped coffee all over your papers, and you didn't yell at me. That was very nice. I don't know how the folks at Sergeant at Arms or whatever felt, but
I don't think I'm not a yeller.
there you go. It was quite messy, but I really want to thank you and the committee for all your good work and the tough times that we do have ahead. As we're trying to balance the funding needs and the service needs as well. And I want to commend teachers right now. It's a tough time to be out in schools and doing that work and being on the front of the issues there and being there with your students. And I commend them for the good work that they do. And I would say courage as they're going through that. Appreciate all the good work of the paraprofessionals in the schools too that keep it running, and the all the staff, the support staff. They're just great. That said, we do get involved with pension funding. That's one of our primary interactions with you and Senate GovOps and the Appropriations Committee. And this past year, every 5 years, we do a review of assumptions and kind of look back. So you prepare an evaluation, which is a review of how much it costs to pay for pension benefits and how much you need to put in this year versus so that you can have full funding of those when they become due for teachers and state employees and municipal employees. And every 5 years, we do something called an experience study that takes a look at the assumptions that you use to value this and what the benefits are going to look like, and we update them. And you do that because you want to re-tinker, you want to realign, true up, basically, I guess is the right word, your assumptions to what the economy looks like, what the experience of turnover and retirements looks like, and what the demographics, how old are people, how long are they going to live, those kind of things. So we undertook one this year, an experience study, and it had a significant impact on all of the retirement funds, particularly the teachers fund. It essentially pushed up the unfunded liabilities, which is significant. And it also pushed up the ADEC, the actuarially determined employer contribution, which is the amount that the state would, the recommendation from the actuary, how much the state should put in to continue to get that education, the Vistas of Vermont State Teachers Retirement Pension Fund to full funding by 2038. So we did that process, and it added $379 million to the unfunded liability. So in 2021, the budget based on the 2019 valuation, the unfunded liability was $1.5 billion. It is now $1.933 billion, an uptick of $379 million. The ADEC, the amount that would have to be appropriated, went from $135.6 million to $196.2, so an increase of $60.6 million. And as you've heard in published reports, the normal cost portion of that, the ADEC is made up of the actuarially determined employer contribution, is made up of what's called the normal cost and a portion of the unfunded liability. And the Ed Fund pays the normal cost per a statute change that you folks made in 2018, I believe. And normal cost means that if I started today and any of the folks that start, whatever their age, whatever their position, it would look at how old are you? What's the probabilities of retirement? How much are you making? What are you likely to make? And how much do I need to put aside for your retirement? And that's the normal cost. The unfunded liability is a function of when you've had a miss on the assumptions, or in the case of the teachers fund, significant underfunding by the state from 1990 to about 2007, where they did not put in what the actuary recommended, and that pushed up the unfunded liability. So the normal cost went up significantly from around 7-8 million to about 38 million. And that puts considerable pressure on the Ed Fund, although it is the policy of where, it's in statute, but the decision of where you allocate that, whether Ed Fund, General Fund, is within the purview of the General Assembly. So I'll stop talking about this in a minute, but I'll get to the driving point on this, which is today, in a matter of hours, we will be finishing a report that we've produced to lower those unfunded liabilities, lower the ADAC, and lower the normal cost as close as we can back to the numbers in the 2021 budget. We've been able to essentially come up with recommendations on the VSERS, the state employees plan to do that. We're only about 2/3 of the way to getting that done. So about 67% reduction in the unfunded liability with the recommendations that we will be sending out shortly for the Teachers Fund. Those recommendations are beginning of the discussion because, frankly, there's a lot of work to be done. It starts a dialogue with the General Assembly on how we're going to get there. What can we do? We've been working with all parties, the VSEA, the Troopers Association, and the NEA. The NEA has said that they do not concur with any of our recommendations, and at this point, and have continued to be involved with us and working with us and looking at the numbers. So while they do not concur with our recommendations, I believe that they will be a party moving forward. My relationships with those folks has always seen them as a fair and straightforward stakeholder and working with us to find solutions. And I believe we will be able to work together with you to find some solutions there.
So if I could just interrupt, if I may.
Yeah.
We have a lot of new folks here,
Mhm.
new to education, new to the legislature, which is great. And then you have some of us who've been around but could use some additional information. I'm just wondering if you would just go back and start with, for a moment, since we're on pension liability, tell folks how the situation that we're dealing with now came about.
Sure.
And then we can move back into a little bit about possible solutions.
Sure. So the pensions go back to I believe somewhere like around the 40s, 1947 comes to mind, but I'd have to have one of my history buffs take a look at that. But a former member of the House with you, Dylan Giambattista in our office, is the biggest history buff we have. So I'll engage him on that. But so what a pension is designed to do is, as you work and you put money aside, that you will have adequate monies in retirement. And we have what's called a defined benefit plan, which means that you put in your money, the state puts in its money, we invest those dollars, and at the end of that, you will have a retirement based on your salary and years of service. The state invested those dollars, the teachers put their dollars in, and the state from 1990 to 2007 failed to put in what the actuary said is the required amount of money to meet that pension obligation. And in some years, I believe as low as 38% of what the actuary recommended. Now, think about your home. If you have a child that you want to assist them in post-secondary education and you're putting money aside to do that, and you say, well, I'm not going to start till their sophomore year of, I'll make it up. I can't do it now, but I'll start when they're a sophomore year in high school. You're not going to meet your post-secondary funding goals. If you don't put the money in, you can't invest it. You can't invest a promise I'll do more later. You have to have cold hard cash to make that work. So until 2007, for a very long period of time, the teachers system did not have adequate funding from the state. And we corrected that with a lot of good work with you folks and a lot of good work with the administration and in 2007 and began to fully fund the amount. But Great Recession hit, and both the state and the teachers system had declines in their investments. Nationwide, there was something in the area of a 30% decline in investments for pension funds. The state, because it was in a better funded position, whether that better than the ed fund that, the teachers fund, pension fund that had came into it in a lower funded position. Since then, we also had, even though we started funding the teachers actuarially required contribution, or now what we call the ADEC, the actuarially determined employer contribution in 2007, we were still taking money out of that fund without budgeting it to pay for healthcare. And again, that's poor funding. We weren't even paying the pay-go. We weren't even paying the premiums, never mind putting money aside for it. We were essentially putting it on our credit card. And in 2014, with the help of the General Assembly, with the help of the administration, we cobbled together a plan to create a new healthcare fund and pull that out. But today, that still has an impact on the funding status of the teacher plan. The other impact is demographics in workforce. We've had considerable changes, as you folks know more so than I do, in the organization and structure of our workforce for teachers in schools. And when you change workforce, you change behaviors. Okay, so when you change restructuring, reorganization, you change the behaviors of individuals within those organizations. And we've seen a higher level of turnover. We've seen more retirements as a consequence of that, and that's kind of pushed the numbers up as well. And I like it to a balloon. You know, when you're looking at the local level and you're saying we're going to for instance, offering incentives to say if you leave, we'll give you a cash payout, not part of the pension fund, but a cash payout, and or lower the property taxes at this end. It pushes the balloon at the other end. So you press down here, the balloon, comes out at the other end with higher pension costs that the state has to absorb. And I've been an advocate of looking at the full cost when you're looking at this and you're looking at workforce changes, but it has had an adverse impact on the pension. The interest rate, declining interest rates are happening, since the Great Recession. We've had some ups and downs in the interest rates, local recent Fed policies, and recently the impacts of even COVID. We've lowered the interest rate assumptions. So that has an impact on increasing the liability. So we're now there with a significant increase, one that we do not believe that the General Assembly can reasonably absorb, because between the state and the teacher system, we're talking about $100 million, $96.6 million to be exact, increase in required contributions. And the Board of Trustees directed me to find solutions to that, and hence the report we're doing. We're working on both the visas and the teacher system.
Madam Treasurer, the Board of Trustees, would you tell us who the Board of Trustees is, please?
So each system has a Board of Trustees, all three, the state, the teachers, and municipal system. I'm a member of all three, and it has a number of members appointed by the governor, as well as members that from the employee groups and myself, and they are charged with administering the pension systems and being the fiduciary to it. So they manage the benefit structures. The legislature actually passes benefit changes. So if we were to make any changes, you would have to do that. But they manage the benefits of the system. They deal with the services of the pension fund. They don't do the investments. That was moved to a Vermont Pension Investment Committee in 2005. And so the Vermont Pension Investment Committee has the dollars associated with each of the three systems in a pooled investment vehicle, managing accounting for each separately, so that we get some economies of scale, lower the costs, and have a better performance on the pension funds. So they are the fiduciaries. They're in charge of the fund. They have directed our office to look at options to reduce these liabilities. As again, I am a member of that, and our staff, we have 35 staff, 37 staff in total. Believe 14 of them are in pensions that do managing the benefits, take care of the retirees when they want to retire, provide counseling, get them on payroll. And this summer we had a record number of retirees, 498 in the month of July. A good number of those teachers, and I'm proud of our staff for getting that done in a remote environment and making sure that everybody got their retirement check on time. So I know I'm going on and throwing a whole bunch at you, and I'll stop there. And if you have any other questions.
Questions? Senator Persley.
Thank you, Treasurer Pierce. My understanding is that you have 3 proposals, but we're not seeing those until the report is released, or?
Well, I can kind of give you an overview of where we're at. So the report's going to be released. We're just doing the final proofing, trying to get this thing wrapped up because we said we'd get it done today, and I don't want to be doing it at 11:59 tonight. But we're trying to wrap it up. We have a number of proposals in there. Regrettably, they're very, very painful. I can't say, if you're going to try to lower liabilities by $600 million, 379 million in the teachers fund. And again, we weren't even able to reach that. It was too heavy a lift. We got to about 67%, but they're painful. We're talking about adjusting or eliminating or the cost of living for teachers in retirement, active teachers when they reach retirement. I've made a very distinct line in the sand that anyone who's already retired should not be impacted by this. They got an estimate when they did it. They signed off on the paperwork that what their retirement would be, and I don't believe it's appropriate to impact those folks. But looking at various ways to cost of living adjustments are the single largest impact in terms of making any gains in terms of recouping some of those dollars. It can be eliminated for all actors upon retirement. It can be phasing it in. It can be, I think one that we favor more than others is to set a threshold. So the first, let's say $20,000 of a person's retirement still gets COLA, and any money after that would not be subject to COLA. That provides some retirement security, particularly for individuals that have lower incomes in work and therefore likely to have lower pension benefits, and provides a little bit more retirement security. We're able to do more of that in the state system than we are in the teacher system, just based on the numbers. We've also looked at what's called average final compensation, which right now a teacher, you take the 3 consecutive best years of compensation and you average that out for determining what the average salary for pension benefit calculations. And we're talking about increasing that AFC to a higher number, which would essentially be a benefit change. Presuming that people get raises or step increases as they move on, it would likely lower the amount of retirement benefit. And we're also talking about ways to push out the age of retirement further for folks so that it benefits the system. You have less years in retirement, and you also individuals that this gets complicated, that are essentially older, that are at certain levels, are what we call an actuarial gain to the system, and incents folks to stay in on that basis, and some contribution increases. So all of our recommendations are centered on those particular areas, and there are different combinations. Our report recommendation, given the situation, has the most painful one, I would say, in terms of eliminating COLA for all actors upon retirement. But we do have scenarios in there for others for consideration. And in fact, we did 28 different pieces of scenarios, elements, and we present them all in the report for the teacher system, 29 for the state system, and so that we can have a conversation and cobble together something that might work together.
So the report will be coming out, and you'll be presenting it to us, different options to the legislature.
Yeah, well, I think that, we're going to need to have a talk with leadership of how they want to proceed. Yep. Obviously, GovOps is one of the committees of jurisdiction, the appropriations, and obviously you folks in particular with the VSTERS fund. And we want to talk with the leadership about which includes you, how to move forward. What's the best way? We've been having ongoing discussions since mid-December with the employee groups. We've met most of the time twice weekly with the NEA, and then a separate twice weekly meeting with the VTA, the Troopers Association, and the VSEA. So we spent a lot of time walking through this, testing different ideas. We put some recommendations in. I recognize that It's very unlikely, Senator, that when I turn in a report, whether it was clean water or any other report that I've turned in, that legislature says, "Yep, that's it, we're done. Best idea is great. We're going to just go with that." It doesn't usually work that way, and so what we expect to have is a dialogue around those what we have, and move forward. We have had quite a few meetings. I actually met with over 700 teachers through I guess it was a Teams meeting, or the other day, kind of a town hall, was over 700. I at one point someone said it was actually 800. I'll settle with over 700. It's a large group, and over 300 state employees, both of them on Tuesday the 12th. And walked through this. We met with their councils, their boards, their legislative committees. And so it's been an active process to work through this. And no one's happy. And am I going to say they overwhelmingly are going to endorse anything? In fact, the NEA at this point has not. It's part of a process to continue to work together and find a solution.
Questions? Senator Hooker, do you have a question?
I'm just trying to think.
Sure.
Thank you, Treasurer, for all of
You
this.
guys have to call me Beth. I'm sorry, please.
Yes, it is.
Please.
Thanks, Beth. So when is the anticipated, what's the goal for paying down the liability? 2035? Is that
2038. So we established that in statute, a 30-year plan in 2008. And we're trying to walk, we're obviously moving along in the plan. We've done okay. We've made a lot of changes over the years that have saved the plan. The plan's over $1.5 billion combined with the plans. But the changes we made, for instance, on how you pay the education and changes on how we amortize like your mortgage, how you set that up. But we need to do more. This couldn't come at the worst possible time. We've got COVID, we've got all sorts of stresses in our budget. The teachers are on the front lines. I can't tell you how difficult this is. It's kept me up at night. It's going to keep you folks up at night. It isn't easy, but as the stewards of taxpayer dollars and as fiduciaries to the fund, I want a fund to be there. I'm interested in making sure that everyone has retirement in the future, making sure that we have a defined benefit plan that provides retirement security. And I would not be doing my job to preserve financial security and retirement security without making these very hard recommendations. And again, they're starting points or options to begin the discussion.
Other questions? Yes, Senator Chittenden, please.
Treasurer Pierce, thank you again for hosting the other night and also for being here today. This is an incredibly important topic, and I have full faith that you are working through this in the right way. I'm going to say something that I'm sure you already know, but I would just say I was on the other night, and I'm going to try to mention my wife, the teacher, at every Education Senate committee.
There you go.
So she was on as well, and I just want to say one of the most important things I'm expecting with this report that you're going to lay out is communication. So just being able to lay out to all stakeholders what the options really are, and giving a lot of time for everybody to understand the trade-offs and what it truly means for people. So I'm sure you already know that, but I just think for constituencies out there that are going to be watching this so closely, lots and lots of time, communication sessions, ways to get everybody to understand what we're weighing.
I very much appreciate that. Again, as I said, I didn't think the legislature, I'm going to drop a report and say, yes, you're going to do it. I didn't think that the members of the employee groups were going to do the same thing. It's a dialogue and it's a process, but that's how we get things done in Vermont. Hopefully we'll do more of that in other institutions of government. But this is the Vermont way of doing things. And I'm proud of the teachers. And I want to say, too, this isn't pleasant news for anyone that we've been having this conversation. But our office and the staff and myself have been treated with a great deal of respect and cooperation, and I hope we are doing the same with the employees and the employee representatives as well.
Other questions? Senator,
No question. But thank you again for your work and for being here. It's a
Appreciate that.
struggle.
Thank you.
We all feel it. We all feel it.
It is.
okay. let's move on then. If we,
Sure.
you have some more time. Can you tell us other things, that you are working on that might interact with this committee? And I'm particularly interested, though, in hearing a little bit about your position on bonding, if you could incorporate that as we talk about things that might be on your radar. As you know, we are dealing with a broadband issue that we hope to continue to address through CARES funding and other ways, as well as an early childhood issue. So if you would talk with us, that'd be great.
Yeah. I appreciate that, and thank you. Just briefly, 2 minutes. We also have a financial literacy component in our office. We've done a number of programs at the elementary school level and the high school. My favorite is something called Reading is an Investment, and we've had over 130 schools participate for kids from kindergarten through sixth grade, and they get books. They work with their librarians. They go through a reading process on 3 books, and they do some logs. And we were able to see improvement in reading, I believe, so we're accentuating that, and hopefully improving people's future money habits. Now, you're not going to give a kid in the first grade a book on your 401k or asset allocations and investments. That's probably not going to work out, but it might be about the bunny that saves versus the bunny that doesn't. But we're trying to instill good practices. We've had some of this interrupted with COVID, but we're continuing on in the spring. And we've expanded the program to do an after-school piece as well, which we think is adding to reaching more and more students, and working with the curriculum again with the after-school groups. It started a couple of years ago as a pilot, and it's doubled since then. And we're going to continue that work. I'm going to get to the issue of bonding and the needs, because I would agree with you. There's a whole bunch of needs out in the state, whether it's connectivity. And I do believe I've looked at the CARES bill at length, and that there's some opportunities there. And also you've got some connectivity opportunities with VEDA, the Vermont Economic Development Authority. And I'd be happy to work with you folks on both of those.
I'm sorry, Madam Treasurer, did you say the CARES bill?
The CARES bill.
Oh, the CARES bill, yes, thank you.
Sorry. And I actually was chair of I'm the past president of something called the National Association of Auditors, Treasurers, and Comptrollers. And you don't get a geekier group than that. The treasurers are the exciting ones in the group, by the way. But I chaired a committee of 7 treasurers and 7 comptrollers, the best, I believe, in the country. If anybody asks me, the best treasurer in the country is a woman named Nancy Kopp, the treasurer of Maryland. But and we took a look. We went all the way through the CRF funds, the CARES Act, and we met weekly, and then later on every 2 weeks. Took it apart, looked at it, gave recommendations, provided some input to the Treasury Department and the like. And we're going to reinstitute that here. And one of the things that we're going to continue to look at is connectivity and how we can work with that. And I think there's an opportunity there. So we're going to continue to be involved in that. VEDA has some arrangements with the state around broadband and connectivity.
Madam Treasurer, remind everybody, VEDA. Can you?
Yes, thank you. I tend to
want everybody.
Acronym. Sorry, the Vermont Economic Development Authority, and I'm a member of that board as well. And there may be some opportunities to partner with them on some financing ideas there. We'll look at that. The other issue you have, frankly, is infrastructure in school buildings and the condition of the school buildings. I know that President-elect Biden, and I know that the House has been very interested in infrastructure. And in fact, several months ago, Congresswoman Pelosi introduced a bill that had a big infrastructure piece to it, and a lot of it green, a lot of it environmental, which I think is great. What I thought was interesting or disappointing was that the bill did not have any specific line item for school buildings, and I hope that will be addressed in the upcoming bill. But I think there's some opportunities for assistance there, and we need to keep an eye on that. Borrowing monies are kind of scarce, and when you borrow, you put money on your credit card, you have to pay interest on it, and a lot of times folks view borrowing as a funding source. It is not a funding source. It is a financing mechanism to grab a stream of revenues, bring it forward so that you can do something now and then pay that back over the years that you bond. So as a consequence, it's not revenue. It's not revenue replacement. It is again, it's a way to finance those things with the future revenues. It costs money. There's interest associated. Even with the low rates that we have, if you're doing a 20-year bond, it results in a significant amount of interest. And it can vary depending on the bond between the bond that you do, someplace between 25 and 30% of the money that you're borrowing is going to go back into the form of interest payments. I'd rather do things with pay-go for cash, with appropriations to the extent that you can, because frankly, you're not paying interest on it. And then you have more dollars down the road. You're not borrowing from the future to pay now. And for me, that's to the extent we can do that, that's very important. When we talk,
I'm just wondering, but if you think about, let's talk about connectivity for a second. I mean, I think the argument could be made if we were to borrow now, that connectivity, what that could possibly give us would be could be a dramatic improvement, not only in people's lives, but certainly in, perhaps, economic improvement, where people live, how they work, getting people to work here remotely.
Absolutely. And I agree with all that. But again, it has to be repaid. Let me go back to the housing idea, for instance. Senator
Chittenden has a question.
Treasurer Pierce, I completely agree. Borrowing money is not free. I would just add one additional perspective, and I wanted to hear your reaction to it. I always see bonding as one way to spread the cost of an asset over its years of use, so that those that are benefiting from the asset are paying for it during those time periods, rather than laying the entire cost on the taxpayers of today. But I completely get the cost of capital. And I don't know if we're going to go there and how much time we have, Chair Campion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on paying for schools and how we might lower that cost of capital with state bonding that would then be available to municipalities and school districts.
Sure. Well, I think there's a very good point that you've made, Senator. When I talk about bonding, I say there are reasons to bond. One of them is that when the cost of inflation on the construction you might want to do, whether it's a bridge and or asphalt or steel, exceeds the cost of the borrowing, that's something you want to look at. Or if you have an opportunity for federal funding that you can utilize. For instance, the Champlain Bridge, 80% was federal funds, 10% was New York, and 10% was us, and we did that through a transportation bond. When those revenues are identified, I understand you have economic impacts, and that's very good, but what is the revenue source down the road going to be? Is it identified? Is it reliable? And can you build it into the budget? Because I grant you that there are economic benefits, but how do we get back those dollars to pay the bond? What are the distinct revenue source? And the last one that you just mentioned is the concept of intergenerational equity, that a school built now is going to serve several generations, and therefore bonding it essentially equitably distributes that cost across several generations. That's a more philosophical argument. Some folks believe that entirely. Other folks, I won't say the name of the town because I don't know if they're still doing it, but one of the more wealthy towns in Connecticut said, we're not going to borrow at all. And the argument is there's no intergenerational equity in that approach. Others, you put it all on your credit card and then you're in trouble. So there has to be a balance in between. We have multiple needs in this state, school building being an important one. And I'm hoping as we look at the federal government and what infrastructure bills may come out that we have some opportunities there. But we have to be careful about how much we put on the credit card and have a distinct available revenue source to pay for it. I understand the economic benefits, whether it's education, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's housing, but we also have to balance the credit card. And so my perspective on it is we need to manage all of those processes, and we try to do that with how much can we borrow, which is a process that we use for something called the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, another acronym. But we set a limit that we provide a recommendation to the institutions committees for borrowing in that particular year. One of the arguments is the interest rates are really down right now. This is the time to do it. You're going to pay it back. You're still pay it back. And, you know, at home, you manage your credit appropriately, and we need to do that as a state. I really want to work with you on school buildings and find a solution. And I'm hoping that we have the opportunity to do that. But sometimes, and I'm not trying to be nasty with what I'm about to say, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to put it on the credit card and worry about it later. And I don't want to go down that road, because just like in the pension systems, when you said, we'll pay that liability down the road. We'll figure out how to pay those extra payments down the road. It put the system in jeopardy. And frankly, we need to be careful that we're already paying $80 million a year in debt service. We need to take a look at how we can reduce our appetite for debt and find cash solutions to do what we need to do. And I'm all in on school buildings. You folks have a very sacred issue and responsibility, because we're talking about the future of our children, and definitely want to work with you on that.
Madam Treasurer, to that end, are you, how will you be partnering with the Biden administration, for example, in ways that can help us? We've been talking about this a lot in this committee. How can we partner with them, whether it's pilot programs, funding? Can you just say something about how you work with the feds?
Sure. Well, we're involved with, number one, we've got the best congressional delegation in the country right now, and I'm very pleased with what they do. And they definitely look out for our interests, and you see that in some of the funding bills out of Congress. And I'm very proud of each and one of them. I'm involved with two organizations. There are others as well that work with this, but the National Association of State Treasurers and the National Association, as I said, of Auditors, Comptrollers, and Treasurers. I'm the past president of both of those groups. And we do a lot of advocacy. In a typical year, we would have been down in D.C. right now in those in the administration buildings, meeting with senior staff of the president-elect, or let me say that in another couple of weeks, we would have been doing that. We've done that with each administration, talked about issues. We worked on specific issues. NAST, the Treasurers Association, advocates on different issues. I think that infrastructure is one that we've had a lot of interest in the past. That's bipartisan. And we're going to continue to work with them to look at what does an infrastructure bill look like? How do we get that money to the states and localities, and let's pass something that works for us. I mean, to be very candid, there were some infrastructure proposals that were more going to be private sector interest rather than public sector interest. And for me, we need to make sure that we get what we need, and we'll continue to advocate. But you got the best advocacy team in the country with our congressional delegation.
Well, we've got a damn good treasurer too. So,
well, thank you.
We really, really, really do appreciate these conversations. Questions for Treasurer Pierce? Please, Senator Chittenden.
I think I heard a lot of that we want to work together and look at things. One thing, I don't think it can be answered today, but Treasurer Pierce, if you can direct me some way. And before I make my question, I just want to echo what Senator Campion stated. We have the best darn treasurer in the United States.
I appreciate that, but I got some really good mentors out there too, and other treasurers. So
I understand we used to, as a state, have a state bond bank to lower the cost of capital for local schools, and we stopped doing that. And I'm not saying I want to do that again. I want to understand why we stopped and what the reasons for looking at it again. But maybe you can't answer that today. But if you have readings for me to look into, that's on my to-do plate.
Well, we do have a municipal bond bank that continues, and it relies somewhat on the state's moral obligation and to lower the cost of financing. So they do the bricks and mortar in the various municipalities and entities. So and they're a good partner, and we should talk about ways that we can work together. So that does exist. There was some, I think what you're referring to was there was a specific process to put some money for doing school building funding and aid, and then that was going to be paid out of the bonds that the state has. And what happened there is that you ended up having to freeze that program because there wasn't the resources to pay for what was going out there to play catch up on it. So we need to have a conversation about that. And with the ability to incorporate more school building into the bonds, the capital budget. Now, as I say that, I can see Senator Benning and Representative Emmons saying, no, we got all these other things too, and they're very big on schools as well. There's no ifs and buts about it. But they've got a balancing act and how we can do that. But we typically would pay for the essentially the grants to the or loans to the educational entities through that borrowing. And there's a limited resource, and we have to figure out how to do it for everyone. And I know that the institutions committees, Senator and Representative Emmons are as interested as I am in working with you to find solutions for the schools. They also need to find solutions for energy efficiency, housing, our buildings, corrections. It's a tough job over there, and you have a tough job. They have a tough job. I'm glad that you folks are doing that. Good work.
Senator Terenzini, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo your comments on bonding. I spent 10 years at the municipal level on a select board, and it's always very tempting to look at your municipality and see, well, we need this done, we need that. We'd love to have one of those. And the temptation of bonding is there when you don't have the funds. But I appreciate your fiscal restraint and recommendations around that, because we all know there's a few municipalities out there that bond the heck out of everything. And then you think, oh my gosh, you got to pay this money back, and it's going to be generations that pay this money back. And it's not going to get easier, because down the road, you're going to need something else, and then something else goes wrong. So, setting up depreciation accounts, putting a little money away for rainy days, that's always good. But anyways, I just wanted to say thank you for being here today, and thanks for your comments on the bonding.
Appreciate that. And we are looking at ways to develop a pay-go reserve that might be able to fund projects in the future, and out of cash as opposed to bonding. The least cost, the most cost-effective way to provide for infrastructure. So we're working on some recommendations there.
Great. Other questions or comments? Madam Treasurer, thank you very much. I know this will be one of multiple visits. It's good to see you again. Great conversation. We'll look forward to your final report and hearing from your office again, and look forward to continuing the work together.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. Again, the youth in this state are very important. What you folks do is incredible. And just from the questions I've heard today, you've got yourself one heck of a good committee, and they've got yourself one heck of a good chair. So thank you very much for what you're doing, and looking forward to working with you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Great questions. We're going to just take a 10-minute break, and at 3 o'clock, we're going to return, and we are going to hear from the Clay Purvis and June Tierney, the Commissioner of the Public Service Department, about where we are with regard to broadband. Senator Lyons, please.
Really quickly, I have a phone call coming in at 3 o'clock. I was hoping that we would maybe be fudging around that. So I may not dive back in right at 3, but I'll be listening with the other ear.
Okay. Yeah.
I apologize. It's something that I couldn't put off.
It's no problem at all. It's part of the job.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. See you in 10 minutes.
Senators, please take your video and mute yourself. Thank you.
All right. It being a little after 3, let's get started. Wonderful to see you, Commissioner.
Likewise.
And I see that Mr. Purvis is there as well.
He is, because we both know that without Clay, nothing is possible to convey. So at least not about broadband.
Well, it's great to have both of you here. Very much appreciate it. We have been, as I'm sure you've been talking about in other committees, the broadband needs in the state. We also know that this pandemic has highlighted the situation that we're in. And so what we're looking for is an overview of where things stand, how we might get to our ultimate goals of giving everyone broadband and access. And with a particular eye for us, of course, school children, schools, are that need it the most, those that don't have it right now. So with that, thanks for being here, and
Great. I'll take it from there.
Great, thank you.
First, congratulations on your chairmanship.
Oh, thank
We
you.
miss you in Senate Finance, but I'm delighted to see another committee as well. Senators Chittenden and Terenzini, I don't believe I've had the pleasure of meeting you. So here we are. And Senator Hooker, it's nice to see you again, of course. And Senator Perchlik, it goes without saying, it's nice to see you too. I have with me two secret weapons, Clay Purvis and Rob Fish. They're not really secret because they've both been very prolific, but these two guys are the keepers of data and keepers of order when it comes to our efforts to make progress on broadband deployment in the state of Vermont. What I'm going to touch on very briefly are a couple of things. Chair Campion, since you said you wanted an overview, what I would like to draw your attention to is that the department today will be filing its annual report on the connectivity division's work for the year. And so I would urge you to have a look at that, because that'll give you a nice tidy summary of all that we've been doing this past year and where we are on things like level of deployment, types of technology, and the like. So it's a good primer, if you will, for the state of broadband right now. We also have a variety of maps and documents that we'll present to you today for the overview. Let me also say, for the benefit of folks who may be new to the world of broadband regulation and deployment, the state does not have jurisdiction over this area of connectivity. It belongs to the federal government, but that doesn't mean we stand still and don't do anything. Rather, it means that we practice the art of the possible. And that means, in part, working with such resources as are available in the state, money that has been gathered in the Connectivity Initiative Fund, for instance, which is funded through a universal service fee that everyone pays on their telephone bill. And the other thing that we also use here in the state is the power of persuasion with our federal delegation, who've proved quite adept over the years in securing resources for the state. And we also we've more recently have been working with communication union districts, which if you haven't heard that term before, you heard it now. Those are basically, think of a fire district or a water district in your community, and just put communication on there, and you get the idea. These are folks who on a volunteer basis spend their time identifying their community's needs for connectivity, and then coming up with plans. And I think the direction that the state is taking is to also have them construct and possibly operate this infrastructure that fills the gaps that are left behind by the competitive marketplace, where, again, the state doesn't have any power to dictate terms or control. It's an interesting tension between the CUDs and the marketplace, because the CUDs remain a subunit of the government, if you will, and are therefore answerable to the public records laws that we have. That is right and good, but it also puts them at a competitive disadvantage to the market players that they're having to engage with as they try to plan for and ultimately construct infrastructure in their communities that they need customers for. So I expect that's an issue that you'll hear more broadly about in the Senate this session, and I just wanted to flag that for you. Before I pass the baton to Clay, there's one other thing I'd like to say, and that is I'm delighted to have this committee take an interest in broadband, because I think we have been thinking too narrowly about broadband in our country and in this state. We've analogized it to a utility service like electricity or water, but when you think about it, it's more like a highway system. And so, Senator Perchlik, that should speak to you, given your membership on transportation. Increasingly, it's getting more and more difficult to do things in our culture and in our society to be active as a citizen if you don't have broadband. So yes, there is definitely an education angle, and a lot of work is needed in this area, not just to figure out what we can do for education, but also to understand how what has been done so far for education can fit together and perhaps fit together better with other initiatives that we have, and hopefully aid that will be coming from the federal government. So Clay, if you'd like to get started on the materials that you have for the committee, and then hopefully we also have time for Rod to present a little bit on communication union districts. Go ahead, Clay. And you're on mute.
I should be unmuted now. Good afternoon. My name is Clay Purvis. I'm the Director for Telecom and Connectivity with the Department of Public Service. Just wanted to give a little time today to talk about where we are with broadband and where we're going. This is actually I believe my first time in Senate Education, so I'm happy to be here. Try to share my screen here in just a second. But first, let me get what I'm going to share up. There are two periods in history that we'll talk about today. That's before the pandemic and then after the pandemic. This time last year, we were coming in to the legislature and reporting on broadband availability. At that time, we had 69,000 houses and business locations that lacked broadband that meets the federal definition of broadband. So I think the most significant thing our division does.
Clay, you're
Am I cutting out?
Yeah, you're cutting out.
Okay. So I have really bad broadband at my house. I really need help. Is this better? Should I sign out and come back in?
This feels better to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay. Sorry about that.
And I haven't. There we go. Senator Chittenden mentioned that he's having difficulty seeing. Please know, if Clay has already submitted this to Jeannie, that it is probably available online. And for new members, new senators, I should have said this earlier on, or your other committee chairs have mentioned it, that you can find all the documents on our committee page. And that's a good resource. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I'm not sure what you missed or what you heard, but our division maps broadband availability in the state of Vermont. And in Vermont, we're unique from other states in that we map broadband based on individual locations. So each house, each business location, we assign a value of what kind of broadband is there. Other states, they do polygons and neighborhoods and different methods. Ours is very specific to a building location. So in Vermont, we have about 308,000 residential and business locations. In January of 2020, our mapping showed that of those 308,000 locations, 70,000 locations lacked broadband of 25.3, or the federal definition. So that's 25 megabits per second upload and 3 megabits per second down or better. To put that in practical terms, what we're talking about is broadband that's provided by a cable video company like Comcast or Charter, or a fiber to the home provider such as EC Fiber, Burlington Telecom, Waitsfield Champlain Valley Telecom has a lot of fiber. Those companies offer speeds of at least 100 megabits per second symmetrical. So that's really fast. We wouldn't be having the kind of problems that you're having with my connection today if you had those speeds. So when we started last year, we had 69,899 locations that lacked usable broadband. As of today, we are in the process of building many projects throughout Vermont that is expanding broadband, and the federal government has also funded broadband projects throughout the state. We now have 46,500 locations that did not receive some kind of funding yet to upgrade their broadband to 25.3. So in the past year, we've really brought the problem down from 70,000 locations to 46,000, or a 33% reduction, which just goes to show what money can do.
Clay, if I could just
Yeah.
footnote that too, it's important also to understand in this conversation that there are different views as to what is acceptable and what is not in terms of service. And so when Clay says we have X number of addresses that are not served by 25.3, he is using the federal definition of high-speed broadband service. But please understand, many of your colleagues are of the view that anything less than 100 up, 100 down fiber is inadequate. And I'm just putting that out there as a marker so that as you hear the conversation in your circles, you can understand why it is that some people are saying 33% of the problem has been dealt with in the past year. And others are saying, oh, no, that's not the case at all. We, in fact, still have a good deal of broadband in the state that is not up to the standards that we are aiming for in our broadband policy. And just to be clear, the department is well aware that there are many legislators who would like to see 100 up, 100 down, and that is indeed a statutory goal. So we're trying to clarify for you what is the state right now, but that isn't to say that it is the best state or the acceptable state from the perspective of what's in statute. So also I just want to be clear that we are presenting in this map today the extent to which there are solutions in the offing, meaning this doesn't represent broadband as it has already been built. This represents a combination of projects that are in progress right now and that are going to be completed, that are 25.3 or better. And also, I'm sorry, we've switched maps on me now. And also,
I'll go back.
if you could just go back quickly.
Yeah.
And also projects that have recently been funded through a program that the Federal Communications Commission has. They did a bidding process in October called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, and those results were announced in December. And pursuant to those results, we are going to see over the next 6 years, if I'm not mistaken, Clay, those solutions built or provided in the state. And if I'm reading the map correctly, those are the blue, the light blue, and the dark blue blocks, right, Clay?
That's the number of locations that was served in 2020 through one of the programs. This map combines both the connectivity initiative and the RDOF program. So the blue towns are the towns with the greatest amount of locations served.
Okay, so I'm misreading the map, and forgive me, I'm probably not helping by breaking in like this, but that's by way of saying that should you have difficulty making heads or tails of our maps, please don't be shy about calling us and following up, and we'll be happy to go over them in greater detail with you. Back to you, Clay.
Senator Hooker, did you have a question?
Before we go on, Clay, maybe I could ask you to give me an example. I mean, I've heard, as the commissioner stated, some people are saying, 25.3 isn't enough. Give me an example of what 25.3 provides and what's the difference between what that provides and what 100 provides.
Sure, that's a good question.
Obvious, but...
So for point of reference, My personal internet connection is 4 megabits per second down, 1 up. And I can do just about everything that I want to do in my house. I can participate in this Zoom call, not as good as I should be able to, but I can at least be here. I can stream movies from Netflix, access YouTube. So streaming video is fine. My family could not be on a Zoom call at the same time while I'm on a Zoom call. That's 4.1. 25.3 for most residential households is probably a decent amount of service. They could do everything that they want to do. It would be possible to do remote education.
Impossible.
Possible.
Possible. Okay.
Very possible to do remote education, work from home. You could be working from home and playing video games at the same time. I'm just using examples.
Yeah.
100 is super fast. That is incredibly fast. You could run an office building with that connection. In fact, our office building at 112 State Street has a 100 meg connection to it. So there's 100 people working there at any given time. So that is an internet connection that is future proof. It's going to be excellent for what your today's needs are today, and will continue to be excellent for many years to come. Cable video providers, we put them in the 25.3 bucket, but it's important to note that companies like Comcast and Charter do offer broadband packages that are well in excess of 25.3. So you can get a 100 megabit per second download speed from, say, Comcast or Charter. Their upload speeds are not symmetrical. And so that's how the 100 standard cuts out cable. With the cable connection, you're going to get something like 100 down and 20 up. Still, by far and away, more than what you would need to do the things that you need to do on the internet today.
So primarily, is it safe to say that most of us who have internet connections now, unless we're paying for more, have 25.3? A majority?
If you have internet from a cable company, you are probably receiving something more than 25.3. Very few of them actually sell a 25.3 service. The 25.3 metric was actually designed to cut out other technologies, such as DSL. So when the FCC made that the standard for broadband, they said we want to cut out DSL. What is the most that DSL can do? We're going to make the standard, 1 inch beyond that. So 25.3 is something that DSL providers really can't do or could not do at the time that the standard was developed.
Thank you.
Senator Hooker, we also have maps that we can share with you that show the extent to which there's cable plant in the state of Vermont, the extent to which there's DSL service plant in Vermont, and also fiber. And that's a handy way to get a picture in your head about what percentage of Vermonters have access to what we're calling 25.3 via cable, as opposed to 100 up, 100 down. And we'll get you links for those maps because they're helpful visuals.
While we're on that topic, I wonder if you would also give everyone some information on 5G as it relates to this. In other words, I think a lot of folks will say, well, isn't satellite 5G technology going to take care of a lot of these kinds of things?
So that's a great question. 5G is a standard developed by commercial mobile wireless companies, so companies like AT&T and Verizon, T-Mobile are rolling out 5G networks, and those networks are going to have speeds that are well above and beyond 25.3, and you'll be able to access those types of speeds on your cell phone, for instance, when you're out on the street. For Vermont, that's still a ways away. 5G networks are being rolled out mostly in very dense urban areas. The amount of cities covered by 5G is very low. So even if you take a city like Houston or New York, it's not going to be pervasive across the city right now. It's going to be in certain neighborhoods are going to have 5G right now. So I think for Vermont, 5G is going to be a ways away. With that said, carriers are upgrading their 4G wireless networks, and we're getting faster speeds on 4G every year. As you know, the problem for Vermont is that many places in Vermont really have nothing. There's no cell service whatsoever. So that is still a struggle, especially for rural Vermont. At the end of our discussion about broadband availability, I did want to take a moment to talk about T-Mobile project that the department worked on with the Agency of Education and T-Mobile, which I think would speak a little bit to what those kinds of networks can do for students. When we talk about broadband availability, we're mostly talking about whether the facilities are available at an address. So can you buy service or not? And the other side of the problem is really the affordability issue. If you're in Burlington, you have great options. The question is, can you afford it? And for students, we've definitely seen that to be a huge barrier. Not just being able to have the service available at your home, but actually being able to afford it. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well in a little while. As June pointed out, this map shows where broadband money was spent in Vermont. So the dark blue shows where more locations were served by broadband, and it makes sense. A lot of the Northeast Kingdom, a lot of southern Vermont between Bennington and Brattleboro received the benefit of public broadband funding. The RDOF auction that June mentioned, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, we've mapped out the awards for this, and I'll talk a little bit about what this means for Vermont. As June pointed out, this is a federal program run through the FCC. They're spending $30 million in Vermont over the next 6 years to bring gigabit level speeds to Vermont. The green is consolidated communications. The blue is a consortium of electric utility co-ops, so WEC and VEC, along with a couple of communication union districts. So these are areas of the state where we're going to see fiber deployment, and there's some of the most rural areas of the state that are going to benefit from this service. So this is a huge deal for Vermont. It's going to be quite a game changer if these projects are successful. I also wanted to...
go ahead, finish your thought, Clay, and then I want to add something.
Sure. I also wanted to point out that SpaceX is a satellite company, did win several areas in Vermont. They're going to be responsible for providing broadband in these brown areas on the map. That's a service that we expect will be rolled out this year. the map shows where they are responsible under RDOF for providing service, but Starlink will have service all across Vermont, and they will be providing broadband of at least 25.3. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, what I just wanted to add to this is two things. You will likely hear a lot of conversation about the inadequacy of Consolidated and its service, if you haven't already heard that. And that is one of the rubs in broadband world in Vermont, because being the inheritors, if you will, of the baby bell system that was built in Vermont as it was across the country, that system goes all throughout our state. And it was the system that originally brought us DSL service, which in the day was a big deal, and of course now is completely inadequate. So all of that green that you see there is Consolidated now upping its ante and making a commitment to building fiber in our state. It's largely, I think, stringing fiber where right now they have copper, DSL lines. So it's hard to reconcile the conversation about how awful Consolidated is as a company with this prospect that the federal government has set up by awarding this amount of funding to Consolidated to do fiber service in Vermont. And I'm not making a value judgment about it. I'm simply flagging that for you because you're going to hear those parts of the conversation, and it causes some confusion for people, I think. The blue part is something that I'm particularly pleased with, because that is the first sign of the CUDs and our cooperatives getting involved in the connectivity conversation in Vermont. They bid in the auction, and what you see here is the fruit of their considerable hard work in putting together a Team Vermont approach to solving some of those connectivity gaps that we have in our state. So I just wanted to alert you to those dynamics, because it's easy to sort of try to figure it, to get confused about what the left hand and the right hand's doing when it comes to broadband in Vermont. Back to you, Clay.
Thank you.
Sorry, you're cutting out. Go ahead.
So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, now we can.
Thank you. So this is what the federal government is funding. I'll talk a little bit now about what we funded through CRF.
Wait, Claire, there's one more thing I wanted to point out. I'm very sorry. It's also important to understand that these results from the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund auction are beyond the control of the state of Vermont. And so if you can imagine, a lot of where you see the green here on the map is going to have an impact on activities that the CUDs have been doing to plan their projects and to stand up connectivity infrastructure in their communities. And this is nothing that the state is able to prevent the federal government from doing. So I have spent quite a bit of time talking with the FCC over the last several years to say, hey, you folks need to partner better with the states so that we're not, working at cross purposes. But there's been very little appetite to date shown by the FCC to collaborate with the states, so to speak. And it's just important for policymakers here to understand that tension. In many respects, this result that you see on the map here is not what we could have wished for, given the investment that we've been making, intellectual and to some degree revenue in the work of the CUDs. But this is a reality that we have to deal with, that big things happen that are beyond our control.
So these folks are doing things on their own, identifying the geographic regions, etc.
Yes.
Based on what? Based on applications? Based on?
They're doing this based on census blocks. That's the methodology that the FCC uses.
Senator Lyons?
Yeah, no, I just thank you for indulging my absence. I finished my phone call and I apologize for not being here. But Commissioner Tierney, as you're talking about the FCC reluctance, do you believe that to be pushback from the industry itself in not wanting to have to negotiate with another level of government, or is it, what's causing
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, first off, it's good to see you again, Senator Lyons. Nice to
Thank
see
you.
you.
It's good to see you.
That's an interesting question. I have to think that there's some element of that in there, but you have to remember that going back to 1996, Congress made a decided effort to remove state control from the telecommunications picture when it reformed telecommunications in the United States. That was the point in time in which the federal government decided the internet is not going to be subject to the kind of regulatory control shared by the states and the federal government that traditional telephone service was. And the idea was that they thought the internet would develop more freely and more competitively if they kept regulation far away. And here we are several decades later, and what we have is, a competitive market if you're in it. And we also have residual gaps that have nothing competitive in them. And with that, people who are stranded and don't have access to the internet. To what degree the industry played a role in forging that picture, it's hard to say, except that in terms of economics, the gaps exist because there's no business case for somebody to provide service in those gaps. It's not economic. Now, when the FCC gets money from the Congress and it does something like conduct such an auction, whether they design that program to suit the tastes or the preferences of industry, I don't know. I'm not there. But I will tell you this. I know that in my time, when I have gone to knock on the door to talk to the FCC commissioners, I've gotten appointments, and then I have to write a letter afterwards that publicly discloses what I talked about. And I know that industry representatives do that too. The question is, how much of what we say in those meetings ultimately gets into their thinking. Maybe it shows here, but I do know that they conducted a bidding process that is much like what we would do with RFPs, where they have rules for that process, and then they pick the bids on the basis of the merits. And those rules were public, and as you can see here, Consolidated prevailed quite a bit, but so did our consortium that's made up of homegrown members like some of our co-ops and some of our CUDs. So hard to say to what degree industry is choking things off. I tend not to think that way as a commissioner because I'm the commissioner of everybody. So I regulate those same companies, and I have to say that they've also done a lot of good. We just don't talk about that a lot. I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you. That's a good perspective and appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
A good question. Senator Hooker.
Okay, so Commissioner, you mentioned the $30 million over 6 years, or maybe Clay mentioned it, and that's a lot of money, and I'm thrilled to think that we have that. And as I look at these projected projects, my question is, and maybe you're going to touch on this later, what do we do in the interim with the immediacy of the need for broadband in places, especially during the pandemic?
This is where you folks are joining a very difficult conversation because there are competing ideas. What we do in the meanwhile is what we have been doing so far. The Connectivity Initiative, for instance, is a fund that you folks created a few years ago, and that's got monies in it that come from that universal service fee that we all pay on our phone bill. And that's had modest amounts of money in it where small projects here and there could be built. Some of those projects bring 25/3 service via cable technology. Some of those projects bring service via fiber. And in the pandemic last year, you folks voted something on the order of 17 million, I think, in Act 137, of which 12 million was set aside for more connectivity initiative projects and something like $2 million, I think, for line extensions. We've appropriated, I think, all of the connectivity initiative funding and unfortunately not as much of the line extension funding. But still, that was one of the single biggest jumps the state has made in making service available during the pandemic. And noteworthy, some of that money we gave to grants that paid for wireless service, which is very controversial, as you probably know, in the legislature. And it was only because of the emergency circumstances, i.e. trying to get service out to as many people as we can, as quickly as we can, that we went there, because we know that that's been controversial in the past. So, in dramatic terms, if you wanted to blanket the entire state tomorrow, I suppose you might look at a wireless solution, but then you create other planning problems. And also you have to deal with the tension that many of your colleagues favor, the more robust 100 up, 100 down fiber to the premises solutions. And as you heard Clay say a moment ago, that is the future-proof solution. So I hope I'm answering your question. I don't want to be the person who says, if you really want to get service to everybody right now, you pay for wireless broadband, because that is just not that has not been the direction of the state policy, and this commissioner will live up to state policy as directed by the legislature.
Senator Campion.
Yes, please, Senator Terenzini.
As I'm brand new commissioner to the Senate, not to put you on the spot, but can you give me a 30-second understanding of why some of my colleagues would be against a wireless option, just for my own education?
Well, by putting me on the spot, you're showing that you're actually an old hand already. That's what senators are supposed to do, senators. So no offense taken. The long and the short of it is that a few years ago, a company named VTEL received substantial federal funding, something on the order of $112 million, I think, to construct a project which many people understood at the time would result in a canopy of connectivity in the state. And that was in the ARA period during the Obama administration. The grant was given through the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. They monitored the grant, and when it came time to determine whether the grant was compliant or not, they did what they do as an agency, and they made the determination that yes, VTEL had complied with the terms of the grant, and so it was closed out. But as you know, probably from your own experience, we in fact do not have a canopy of connectivity in the state of Vermont. And so there has been a great deal of dissension, if you will, or tension around whether wireless has proved to be a reliable means of addressing Vermont's telecommunications issues. And many of your colleagues have felt that item 1 was to do no further business with VTEL. And I think there's also a piece of this that belongs to the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, which was a project that the state stood up several years ago and then made a judgment call in, I think, the 2015 timeframe to mothball that authority. They had done a substantial amount of planning and administering of funding for what's called middle mile build out of fiber in the state. And I'm not privy to why that particular entity was mothballed. Others would know. But that was the state of play. And so the Vermont Telecommunications Authority's activities at that time were then housed in my agency, and we have done our best to carry on with that work. So I hope I've answered your question, and if you have more, we're happy to spend more time with you on this. But VTEL's been a subject of significant controversy. What you need to understand, though, is that however inadequate some people may think their work was in the past, as a matter of public record, it is a company in good standing in the state. They are licensed to do business. They have a certificate of public good from the Public Utility Commission. They don't have a record of poor service quality that I'm aware of, unless Clay wants to tell me differently. So it's very hard to act just on perception or preconceived ideas about what the company is likely to do, especially in a pandemic when you're trying to get connectivity solutions out to people, which is why in the end I made the judgment that, yep, if we can make service available to 6,000 addresses with 1 grant to VTEL, we need to do that, especially given how well they scored in the competitive process for reviewing the grants. Does that help you?
Yeah, it gives me a much better understanding, and I got plenty to learn still. But I appreciate your explanation, and I think we can all agree that we have to figure out a way to do better for our students and all Vermonters. So thank you for being here.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Back to you, Clay.
Thank you. So this map is the federal RDOF. I'm going to turn now to our state work and what we did in the connectivity initiative in Act 137. When the pandemic hit, before Act 137 was passed, we were posed the question, how do we get broadband to students? And I think that question couldn't be answered without first answering the question, where are the students? We worked with the Agency of Education, the principal and superintendents associations, and individual school districts to collect information on where we had students and where they lacked broadband internet. I have this chart here, or this map here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the legend first. We have three categories of service. Those served at 10.1, those served at 4.1, and those that are not served. It says underserved, it really should be not served. So all of these dots here are locations that lack 25.3. So these dots all have inadequate broadband. We collected information from individual school districts on student addresses, just on an aggregated, non-identifiable way. Where do students live? We married that data with our broadband availability data. So we had information on about a little under 30,000 students. And so of those 30,000 students, we were able to identify a little over 7,000 students. These three numbers add up to about 7,000 students that live at a location that lacks broadband, meeting the definition of broadband 25.3. So when we issued the connectivity initiative RFP, we sought proposals and gave extra points to proposals that proposed to serve one of these addresses. Once Act 137 was passed, we had the authority to implement several programs. One was the connectivity initiative, which June mentioned. We put $12 million into that program, and here are the results. We ended up serving 9,439 locations that lack 25.3. Of those, just under 1,000 were priority addresses. So about a little less than 1 in 10 addresses had a student or a person in need of telehealth. As far as technology,
that begs the question. So of the 9,000, 1,000 were identified as priority.
That's correct.
So
yeah. So
why, the 9,000 weren't priority? Why were those dollars not? Perhaps I'm missing something here. Why weren't more priority households granted the access?
We tried to hit as many priority locations as we could with projects. So you can imagine, for instance, a wireless project might hit 1,000 addresses, but only 100 of them we identified as a priority address. Right. But we're going to do the other 900 addresses. So that's where that issue came in. There were priority addresses scattered all over the state, but you couldn't just do a project that only hit these addresses. nor
Sure.
the other addresses.
Thank
It wasn't the cleanest way to go about it, but given the timeline we were under and the need to roll out as much of this money as possible, we wanted to make sure we were hitting as many of those addresses as possible. We also collected data through a survey and asked people if they had, for instance, a telehealth need or remote work need. So those addresses are included in the final priority number. The vast majority of the data points, though, are students. At the bottom of this chart, this is a chart of the different projects that we funded throughout the state. At the bottom of this chart is a breakdown of funding by technology. So you can see we spent about $8 million on fiber to the home. That's the best broadband you can get. That's the 100/100. And we hit about 2,175 locations with fiber to the home. Cable video, just under 200 locations for about $300,000. And then fixed wireless for $4 million, able to hit 7,070 addresses. So you can see that fixed wireless on a per location basis is by far and away the most affordable or the least expensive. But the legislation did direct us to favor fiber to the premises where feasible. And we did our best to do that. In addition to the connectivity initiative, we were able to implement other programs. One was a program called the Get Vermonters Connected Now initiative. That was targeted at locations and neighborhoods with difficult or situations that made it difficult to serve them, such as mobile home parks, where all of the utilities need to be undergrounded. So getting fiber into a mobile home park is much more expensive than at a residential home that can be served by aerial drop. So, served on telephone poles. Going into a mobile home park, everything has to be put underground. You have to put in conduit, and that can be very expensive. We ended up serving about 322 residential homes with mostly fiber to the premises in mobile home parks around the state. We also initiated a program called the Line Extension Consumer Assistance Program. This was a program where individuals could apply to us to seek funding to get a line extended to their home. So if you can imagine that your house sits 200 yards beyond the end of the cable line, you can get that line extended, but you typically have to pay for it. This program provided the funding for consumers to pay for that line extension. We offered up to $3,000 per home for a line extension. We ended up doing about 260 line extensions at a price tag of $545,000. So, question or yeah.
I have a question. And
Please.
I don't know whether you've covered anything of this or not, but as you're doing this extension, what consideration, if any, are you able to give to the income level of the people? I mean, does that play in at all to the decision
That's a
making?
good question. We didn't do any means testing for the line extension program when we rolled it out. What we did do was limit participation to those who had a a CARES Act eligible need, so remote learning or telehealth or remote work. You had to have one of those three. We did not exclude folks on the basis of income. I think if we were to continue that program, it would make sense to do some amount of means testing to ensure that that money is being spent on line extensions that wouldn't happen otherwise.
The but for test that we hear about, right?
Well,
No,
perhaps. I mean, there are people that would commit murder to get broadband.
Yes, I know.
And some of these line extensions can be very expensive. We heard from many people, though, that they would not have been able to do this but for this program. So
that's good.
We did hear from teachers who took advantage of it, students that took advantage of it. In some cases, we did have doctors that took advantage of it. But I take your point, and I think it's an important consideration as we move forward. We did have to roll the program out very quickly. The legislation passed at the end of June. And we started accepting applications at the end of July. We turned down over 200 additional applications simply because cable companies and other internet providers said they could not do all of these line extensions by December 30th. So we turned down a lot of people simply because we ran out of time.
So, given that the emergency goes on, and we've had a bit of an extension on, I don't know how much money is there, but do you think that we'll be able to, you're doing amazing work. I just want to say, it's just amazing. Do you think that you'll be able to put in additional extensions? I would consider whatever you're doing now as an important part of the emergency and any emergency going forward. So are you still working under that sort of framework and mentality?
The program's on pause right now because of we don't have clear direction on whether we can continue the program. We have not denied applications simply because of the time issue. We've told folks if we get this program reauthorized, we'll come back and do your line extension. That would be my hope, whether it's funded through CRF or some other means. This is a very popular program. People liked it and were very disappointed when we couldn't take advantage of it. So I think the need is still out there, and if there is an ability to continue that program, I think we'd be excited to do that.
Yeah, that's right. Part of what we're struggling with is, I think everybody's struggling with it, is with the deadline having so recently changed in Washington, D.C., the change of administration, the announcement of new aid coming. My perception is that both the administration and the legislature are sort of trying to clear the smoke to see, okay, of the CRF dollars we have left, how best do we spend them? And I know that our connectivity initiatives have been a high priority for both the administration and the legislature, but that look-see is necessary. And if at the end of the day, the upshot is, yes, we want this program to continue, we're poised to do that.
Right. And if schools open up, there might be less.
Precisely.
Yeah, I got it.
Precisely.
Okay. Well, let's hope that the new CRF has sufficient funds to do some more of this work.
Let's hope for a lot of things.
Let's hope.
Clay, back to you.
Sure. So that's 3 of the 4 programs. The last is a temporary broadband subsidy program. So this is tackling that other problem, and that's that of affordability. We rolled this out in tandem with the Vermont June, it's the end of the day, the arrearage program.
Right.
We rolled this out at the same time as the arrearage program, using the same kind of system that almost all of the state applications have been through a Salesforce portal. It was moderately successful. We had, just looking for the number here, 2,935 unique applications. We gave out just under $1 million. The subsidy provided a $40 a month credit on your broadband bill. We made the credit retroactive back to March 1st when the pandemic began. This had the effect of paying some of the arrearages that people were accruing with their broadband provider. If you remember the VCAP program, the electric arrearage program, did not cover broadband. So through the Section 13 of Act 137, we were able to still cover broadband subscribers who had arrearages. A number that's not in this memo, I did want to call out, again, you had to have an eligible use, remote education, telehealth, or remote work need for us to cover your broadband bill. Of the 2,935 applications, 2,036 of them pleaded remote education need. So the vast majority of these applications were for students. This is another program that I think the deadline kind of hurt Vermont in a lot of ways. People were receiving a credit up until December 30th. Now that credit has expired. So we're not giving out credits for any time in 2021. With that said, Congress did authorize the FCC to start a program that's very similar to this. And they appropriated $3.2 billion nationwide for the same purpose. So they're going to have their own temporary broadband subsidy program that will start sometime in March. We have Rob Fish on the phone. In addition to monies we gave to broadband providers to expand service, we did do some grants to communication union districts. Happy to have Rob talk a little bit about that. I do know it's the end of the day. I just wanted to take 2 minutes at some point to talk about the T-Mobile project that we did with the Department of Education, but
Sure. Why
I
don't
would leave it up to you if you want to hear from Rob.
No, why don't you
Okay.
do that now, Clay, and then we will shift to the CUDs.
Great, thank you. Kind of an interesting problem that we face anytime you're doing telecom is that you can do all the planning in the world, and then an opportunity pops up that's not in your plan, and you just have to take it and figure out something with it. T-Mobile approached us in the fall about a program that they were initiating. It's a broadband subsidy program for students specifically. They wanted to they wanted us to promote the program in Vermont. Our initial reaction was no way, because your service is lousy and nobody here has T-Mobile service. We spoke with them for a while about what it is they're trying to do, and we did some mapping work around T-Mobile service and where schools could take advantage of it. Here's the deal that T-Mobile is offering. They will sign people up through schools. So the school has to sign up the students, and T-Mobile is selling the service to the school. They will give away service for free at their lowest tier. For $12 a month, students will get 100 gigabytes of service a month, which is more than adequate for one person to do schoolwork. And then for $15 a month, they're going to get unlimited data. What they're actually getting is a little hotspot device that they can take home with them. They can connect their laptop to that device. The download speeds range between 5 to 30 megabits per second. You get what you get depending on where you live. So we worked with T-Mobile and the Agency of Education, and we came up with a map of where students could take advantage of this program. And it's my understanding that the Agency of Education is pushing this out to school districts right now. But I just wanted to bring it up because it is an area where the Agency of Education and the department have been collaborating, and it is a pretty good deal for students that don't have broadband at their home because they can't afford it. This is a map of reported student residences. We did some drive testing data that we took and applied to that. And I believe this is a map here of 4G LTE data coverage, T-Mobile coverage by school district. So you can see up in the Northeast Kingdom, they have pretty good, or excuse me, the Northwest, they have pretty good T-Mobile service, and then around Burlington, and I assume this is Rutland down here. So there's quite a few school districts where the majority of students could take advantage of that program. So that's it.
Terrific, Clay. Thanks, and thanks on that. We're now going to shift, it looks like, to Mr. Fish. Rob, glad you're with us. Wondering if you would just take a few minutes, let everybody know again what the CUDs are. There are new legislators here, as well as others that might not be fully aware of their structure and how they're working, and provide us with an update.
Thank you. First, may I have permission to share my screen? I have 5 slides that sometimes visuals are quite helpful with talking about the communication union districts.
Absolutely. You've now been made a co-host.
Okay. Okay, I believe everybody should be seeing my screen right now. First, for the sake of introduction, my name is Rob Fish. I'm the Rural Broadband Technical Assistance Specialist for the Department of Public Service. I started in November of last year, just before this pandemic started. So to bring you up to date on the communication union districts, a communication union district is formed when 2 or more towns join together to form a district for the purpose of broadband, what it comes down to, of serving unserved areas. For the sake of point of reference, there are other types of municipal districts, such as solid waste districts, consolidated sewer districts. You get the idea. So the districts have grown dramatically in the last year. Until this past March, there were only 2 districts. First with EC Fiber, which is now serving over 5,000 premises with fiber to the home, and then CV Fiber. And here is where we are at now. As you can see, there's 9 districts, 160 member towns, 58 additional towns and study areas. And what this means is that each of these towns has a representative and an alternate. So we have 160 volunteer board reps and 160 alternates that are working on telecommunications, specifically broadband issues in their communities. So our current challenge is taking what EC Fiber did. I said now they have 5,000 premises served. They started in 2008. We have to compress that in 1/10 the time to serve Vermonters in need. So I want to talk briefly about what the CUDs did during the pandemic. They assisted the department in gathering data in gathering addresses of students, of gathering locations for Wi-Fi hotspots, of distributing information on other programs. Several CUDs have also distributed MiFi personal hotspots, especially up in Lamoille County, via their schools. So one of my goals was building those relationships with schools, libraries, and towns, since we're all in this together. It's going to take all hands on deck to solve the connectivity issues. Some CUDs have created a clearinghouse for information and a case management tool. So lastly, I just want to touch on one thing that they assisted, and it joined with a program the department was doing, which was creating Wi-Fi hotspots around the state. So these are publicly accessible locations you can access from your vehicle. And we've now installed or provided license for 191 sites around the state. The initial focus of this was specifically on communities where there were a lot of students that were unserved. I'm happy to announce that yesterday I found out that a national group is going to take up our charge here and provide as many Wi-Fi hotspots that are necessary to serve the rest of the state. And we'll be announcing something about that soon. But that's just a really quick overview. I know it's the end of the day now, but I wanted to introduce you to CUDs and these volunteer-powered organizations in your community that you should certainly connect with to work on connectivity issues.
Senator Hooker.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Could you share these slides with us? I don't see them on our page.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I think that the structure of CUDs, it sounds like having them in place prior to the pandemic it sounds like it was really helpful.
Yes. Yeah, it was a key to have, really just to have fingers in every community around the state of people that had a pulse on what was happening, what the need was, and how to best address it at the local level and mobilize local resources. Like it was important that we had it and that we were able to grow it even during the pandemic.
And so you had folks then, volunteers going out and assessing what is in their district and giving you that information.
Well, since every
schools, etc.
So since every single community that's a part of the CUD has 2 representatives, those people were responsible for reporting back, for reaching out to their school districts, for identifying Wi-Fi hotspots. We also had assistance from the regional planning commissions in doing that.
Great.
I think to Chair Campion, I think it's important to note too that we had a lot of good organization in place, but these are volunteers.
Yes.
And so I don't think the action was quite as uniform as you might be describing, or that in a perfect world we would have. It wasn't like we had, a command and control approach where we could say to a CUD representative, go out and find out what this school needs. It doesn't quite work like that. But it certainly was a very, very important asset in giving us a good feel for what was on the ground. And it's what enabled us to make good use of those planning funds that you folks authorized for the CUDs. They were able to pick up a lot of ground in assessing what they need in their communities and helping us with the emergency response. For instance, I know people are of 2 minds about the Wi-Fi hotspots because nobody for a minute thinks that that's a great connectivity solution.
Right.
But when you consider that in so many places in the state there was nothing or very little, we had communities banging on our door saying, please, can we have one? And the CUDs were really instrumental in helping us develop a feel for where would it be good to put one, who could be making use of one, and the like. So from that perspective, Vermont had a wonderful collaborative response in at least getting up this rudimentary Wi-Fi hotspot system. And the folks who were involved in those CUDs had a big role in that, as did the regional planning commissions.
Yeah, I can't say how I'm just beyond proud of what they've been able to accomplish when most of these were started in March of last year and some were just started in July. So they're facing a lot of challenges, which if you have a few more hours, we can go into. I'm not going to do that today.
Well, Rob, to that point, one of the big challenges is I think we are balancing so much on the backs of volunteers here.
Yeah.
All of
Yes,
them need
capacity.
some form of staffing, paid staffing, and who's got the money, to give them that. But we've just gotten to the point where for what we need the CUDs to do, they need more resources.
Yes, and the CUDs that were able to use the CARES Act funding to help assist with some of the unexpected administrative support are the ones that performed the best and were able to get into their communities and get us the information and get information out and make stuff happen. So just to echo that, capacity is a key challenge.
Yeah, but you know something.
Sorry, we have Senator Perchlik who's been
Oh,
patient.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had a question about when the T-Mobile program was going to be announced. And then I also had a question for Robert on what is MiFi? Is that just the brand, the trademark of a certain Wi-Fi company? Why
don't I'll address that really quickly. So that's like a personal Wi-Fi hotspot. So it's where a student would take it home.
Okay.
And one other thing to add on the Wi-Fi hotspots, towards the end of the program, we were actually installing them at hotels that were serving at shelters and affordable housing as a way to try to get even more directly towards where people in need the access and can't afford it.
Okay. In the T-Mobile, that's already out there? Like we could tell our constituents about it, or it's going to be announced and rolled out soon? I wasn't clear.
Clay, do you want to take that question since you took us through that, or Commissioner?
Yeah, I think at this point I'm looking at Clay or Rob for that specific answer, Senator Perchlik. I understood Clay to be talking about a different program that's about to be announced. I thought T-Mobile was already live.
Okay.
Rob, you're on mute.
Fish, you're on mute.
Sorry, technology. I'm not as familiar with the program as Clay, but I know the program goes through schools directly. So it's about schools getting on board, not individuals contacting T-Mobile to get involved.
But we can get you that information. Clay would be responding if he's got kids at home too, so he's probably momentarily diverted. But we'll get you an answer on that.
Yeah, just so we can let certain people know to contact their school if their school.
Yes, and Senator Hooker, just to let you know, we have dropped those map links in the chat, so you can go access them there.
You wouldn't mind responding to all of us with the information that Senator Perchlik.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, we can do
Senator
that.
Lyons, did you have a question? And then Senator Hooker.
No, but I continue to be impressed with the work that's being done during the pandemic. I can't believe that you have been able to do so much so quickly. And
well, Senator Lyons,
thank you.
thank you for that. It means more to us than you can possibly imagine, and that goes all to Rob and Clay and the rest of those fine folks who've just been knocking themselves out. I got to tell you, what's been interesting about it is we're all besieged by the pandemic. Having the privilege of being able to do something about it has just been immense and really gratifying. But really, thank you, and I return the compliment to the legislature. You've been wonderful to collaborate with.
That's good to know. I mean, we've got to keep doing it. So
Yes, we do.
thank you.
Yes, we
very
do.
much. And thank you for your work. Really, I know that Clay and Rob, everybody else has been out on the ground doing this in a very difficult time, and the results are outstanding. Really. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It means a lot.
I know that Clay had mentioned that Congress is doing a temporary broadband subsidy program that'll start in March, and maybe that was the program that Senator Perchlik was wondering about.
No, those are two different ones, but good connection.
T-Mobile is already in place, but this one is starting in March.
Yeah, this is a really good example of this peculiar jurisdictional divide I'm talking about, Senator Hooker. T-Mobile decides to do it because T-Mobile decides to do it, and we can't force them to do something like this. The appropriation that the FCC will be working with is something that Congress has legislated, so FCC has an obligation to do that, and they have to create a program very quickly, much like we had to create one with our broadband subsidy program that we did. And that's what will be ready to go in March. But the two are separate. One's voluntary and the other's directed.
Okay. And then when Rob was talking about the CUDs and what they're doing, and you had mentioned, Commissioner, that there wasn't the coordination that we might have hoped for, or the type of coordination we might have hoped for. How, when more money is available, will the word get out to these
Yeah,
organizations?
no, I appreciate your calling me to account for my words there. What I meant to say was that it's important to understand that the CUDs are made up of volunteers. And I think a continuing frustration in this realm of policy is that it begs for more centralized control. And so in that sense, when we think we've created the CUDs, it's easy to slip into thinking we've now created entities that will do what we plan and want them to do. And that's not at all the case. And that's what I meant by not as coordinated as we might hope for, in the sense that we hope for something that's some people hope for something that's very sort of command and control like, in order to create order out of chaos. But that's not the nature of the policy sandbox that we're in here. And so it's in that sense that I could not, as a commissioner, look at the 7 CUDs that already existed in March or April and say, okay, we're going to draft those guys to execute XYZ of a plan that I have to make connectivity better for people in Vermont during the pandemic. It's much more of an iterative, collaborative, what can you tell us? What do you think you need? What do we have? Groping kind of thing that you do. And then you hope for the best, and it being Vermont, good things come. So.
And I have to say that throughout the day, starting this morning, Senator Lyons, with your comment about volunteers in Vermont, it is just incredible how much we depend on volunteers in Vermont.
It is. It is. And we're so very fortunate in that regard. This is something I tell the FCC all the time, is like, we are a small state. That makes us a perfect laboratory for trying out things that, could be scaled up for other states, because we have an unusual degree of collaboration in this state. It goes, it begins with our volunteers, and it goes on to enterprises like our utilities, for instance, who frequently step into the gaps and do things that you might not do if you were in California or Ohio, but you do it because it's the Vermont way. So it's an ethos that permeates every level of our culture here. But it begins and ends with the folks on the ground in the communities who wear all those hats on volunteer basis.
Yeah. The CUDs are truly it's a grassroots force and a grassroots effort of people coming together to figure out what's best for their community. They are working together to coordinating via Vermont Communication Union District Association, which was one of the projects over the past, I guess, 9 months. That's key to trying to bring them up to speed and get them organized. So that's going to continue.
Any other final questions? I appreciate.
I'm trying to give a thumbs up to Senator Chittenden's idea that we need to export our ethos. Absolutely.
It's true.
Senator Cappian, it's been a real pleasure visiting with your committee. Is there anything else we can do for you today?
I think we're going to leave it there. It's been a real pleasure having you. Thank you for all the incredible work you've been doing. I hope you'll continue to keep us in the loop as you progress. I know that so much of this is connected to funds. It's all connected to funds. And one of the things we'll continue to talk about in this committee, and I know other committees are talking about it, is how, given this new construction in Washington, how can we, work with the Biden administration and Senator Leahy in particular to access greater funds for these kinds of infrastructure projects. So
absolutely. And since you've mentioned it, I would point out to you too that my observation is that in the areas of health and education, those are 2 areas where at the federal level, there seem to be many more avenues by which funding has been made available in the past for broadband, and meaning both infrastructure and equipment, and now subscriptions. So it's important to get a handle on those outlets as you craft your policy, and we're happy to do what we can to help you with that. And there is also, I think, an individual in the Department of Education whose name now escapes me. I don't know if Rob knows it, but Clay mentioned it to me yesterday, who's somebody you ought to have in as well. So I'll get you that name.
Senator Lyons may know that name. I see her hand. You're muted.
No, technology.
Technology. Okay.
Listen, I don't know the name, but
Okay. We'll
my
get you that.
question was for the commissioner, and that is, let me know at what point you think it might be helpful for our committee in health and welfare to hear from you. Because I know you came in last year and it was extremely helpful.
Oh,
So-
always glad to come visit with any one of your committees. And
good.
for that committee too, what I just said about education is very much the case. There are a lot of avenues by which federal funding is available and can be made available for health and telecommunications purposes. It was wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
take care,
you,
everyone.
Commissioner, Mr. Fish, Mr. Purvis. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
You too. Committee, we'll be picking up on Tuesday with higher education, our work on higher education. We are going to hear from the president of the University of Vermont, and then we're going to talk to the select committee on the future of public higher education. Senator Baruth will be in with Joyce Judy, who I believe served as one of the co-chairs of that committee, and Brian Prescott, who was the consultant that worked with that committee. Then Wednesday, we are going to pick up again with education finance with Chloe. And I've asked after that to have Ledge Council come in to give folks, I think in particular, new folks to the committee, just an understanding of some of the major policy decisions that have been made around education, particularly the Brigham decision, so folks understand that a little bit, and Act 46, because I know that a proposal is coming our way that might could impact both. So Thursday, we're going to start bill introductions, at least with one bill, and that's where things stand. I can't believe it's just been 4 days together.
Yeah.
So thank you. Questions, comments?
Thank you.
Okay.
We're on our way.
We're on our way. Look forward to continuing our work together. I really can't believe it's been just 4 days.